I believe very strongly in the idea that if you can find a way to do something faster and it doesn't take up too much effort to learn, then you should. I also believe there's an optimal tool for most jobs and a market for the jobs that don't have good tools. That's why I was particularly interested in the Microsoft Surface Dial. As described by Microsoft, it's the perfect tool for creative types. And having become more creative in the last year, I'm willing to take any shortcut to make my process faster. Will the Surface Dial be that solution? Let's talk about it. This is InnoIso, and this is the Microsoft Surface Dial review. The Surface Dial is a microcosm of Microsoft's broader hardware strategy. It was built in the months leading up to the Windows 10 Creators Update, which Microsoft was trying to establish as the perfect operating system for creatives. But here we are years later, and we've heard almost nothing about the Surface Dial. I don't think we need a sequel. Unlike phones, this isn't something that I would expect a regular refresh for, but software features and marketing integration would go a long way to make this appear like it didn't go the way of the Microsoft Surface band. From a hardware standpoint, this fits in perfectly with Microsoft's broader Surface line. It's designed with metal, it feels very premium and very dense. Now, one thing I'll note is that the rotation is contiguous, meaning that it doesn't actually have steps for each stage of rotation. This isn't a big deal, in some ways it's better, but for example, when you're controlling volume, instead of actually getting a tick for each volume step, instead there's actually a vibration motor built in, which I actually found to be a little bit of a disappointment. While a vibration motor was nice to have, there's just a little bit of delay and it doesn't feel nearly as tight as a modern smartphone's vibration motor, for example. And so it really didn't feel like it was giving me a good feedback for what I was doing. It just doesn't feel tight or direct, and worst of all, there's just a little bit of latency. Latency makes what should be a very precise instrument less precise. Can you imagine pressing keys on the keyboard and not knowing how many times they were pressed? That's kind of how this feels. Now, when the Dial was launched, I was a basic office worker with no reason to explore the Surface Dial outside of a mild enthusiast's interest. Now I have a couple applications that I can use to test its functionality. Adobe Premiere Pro is the most obvious one. Adobe was one of Microsoft's partners for the launch of the Dial, and so the integration is relatively robust. Scrubbing the timeline, controlling audio volume, and modifying image properties like saturation, exposure, etc., they're all native. And as my video editing skills could only be described as passable, I mostly only used it to get along the timeline. The same goes for Photoshop, where my skills are limited to making thumbnails. I saw the benefit of the Surface Dial, but at no point did it become absolutely critical for my workflow. Now, what makes the Surface Dial very unique is that the rotational menu that will appear on screen when using it on a Surface device. This was really cool in demos, and I still wonder how they do it, but in practice, I don't have any true reason for wanting the dial to be on screen, and it just slides off unless the Surface is basically sitting flat. Maybe if I took on drawing, it would be more useful, but in most of the applications that I used it in, it didn't really make a lot of sense. The software for programming the Surface Dial is built into Windows, and it has most of the features that I could think to ask for. You can customize every single dial interaction by application, and while there are some specific apps with built-in functionality, you can add dial actions to any apps by just mapping it to a keyboard button. This is quite powerful, but I decided to take it even a step further. Since you can send keystrokes with every rotation, I wrote an auto hotkey script to map multiple shortcuts to the dial. So while scrubbing in Premiere, for example, holding Shift will scrub faster and holding Control will scrub slower. It amazes me that Microsoft added all of these features to the settings menu for Windows. Windows settings are already so dense, I don't know why they wouldn't just use a separate app for the dial. Now, everyone who doesn't have a dial will just have to ignore the likely pretty confusing interface. I'm not sure whether other dial-like rotating knobs work with the Surface Dial's interface and work the same way. I'll have to figure that out later. But I didn't want to end it there. Since the Surface Dial is a form of interaction that I've had with my computer that I haven't had in the past, I wanted to try out very, very unique ways of using the Surface Dial. The first went for gaming. So I tried using the Surface Dial as a controller in a Brick Break style app where I moved the little bat across the bottom of the screen based off of where I rotated the Surface Dial. This wasn't as enjoyable as I expected. Then, instead, I actually used it for racing style games. So I actually built a custom script that allowed me to basically control how rotated the steering wheel was based on the rotation of the Surface Dial. Now, this took a lot of time to kind of lock in and get to a good position, but After some time, I was able to basically control it based off of the position of the mouse on the screen. And using auto hotkey, I was able to basically control how fast and where the mouse moved across the screen. This was a really cool feature, and it was actually a cool alternative to buying a racing wheel for any sort of racing games. Do I think I'd recommend this to most people wanting to play a racing game? Probably not. I've actually got some other solutions coming up pretty soon, so be sure to get subscribed if you aren't already, and you'll be able to see those videos first. On its release, the Surface Dial was priced at $99, which at the time, since again I couldn't find a lot of reason to use it, I thought was too steep. Looking back now, I think it probably makes sense for a premium accessory, but I think now there's a lot of other options in the market for similar sort of solutions. So for example, there's a lot of keyboards dedicated for creators, albeit expensive, that have dials built into them or rotating knobs built into them. Technically, you can build your own potentiometer using a Raspberry Pi or maybe like a Raspberry Pi Zero. There's a couple different solutions online. I haven't gone down that path yet though. Then finally, the fact is all this is doing, like my Surface Buds video, all this is doing is sending a very simple input to the computer that's basically remapped to a keystroke, and that's all it's doing. Granted, there is some additional intelligence here with the way that it creates this rotational menu on screen, for example, but for the most part, I didn't really use those sort of features. If I'm only using it to basically send keystrokes to my computer in a rotational manner, then I could buy something as simple as this. This was maybe a $20 or $30 knob that I bought on Amazon. It's just a volume knob, and it has actual 3 additional USBs, so I could use it as a dedicated hub for some of my mice and keyboards. That's a great feature. Now, it's not wireless, it does connect via micro USB, but the benefit here is that it actually does have those steps that I was talking about earlier. So there's a physical feedback when I rotate the wheel either way. This was significantly less priced than this. Now granted, you can buy one of these used on eBay for quite a relatively low price at this point, but it's inconvenient in certain ways that this one is not. So maybe this is the better solution. Then, since it basically maps to volume keys, I could then take those volume keys in auto hotkey and remap them to something else. Now, it's not perfect because now basically trying to control volume on my computer while using this, I'm unable to do so. Instead, it sends those keystrokes. But that can be done very simply with a toggle switch in auto hotkey that allows you to flip on and off that volume setting. It's all in really cool, and I really like this as a solution. The Surface Dial is quite a bit more premium, but that makes sense considering the price difference between these two. Do I think Microsoft should go and release another Surface Dial? Well, maybe. I think Windows 11 has some additional features that are perfect for creators, and I think more and more Windows laptops are coming out that actually make for a viable solution alternative to Macs for people like me who edit videos. But frankly, I think Microsoft probably will have to go back to the drawing board, look at the way that they create Windows 11, and maybe change it up just a little bit. This was an okay product for the time, but now there's a lot of other entrants to the market that create an alternative solution. Maybe Microsoft's benefit is that they're such a large company and the Surface line is relatively well known, to the point where releasing a product like this and seriously marketing it, they'll be able to bring a whole new volume of people interested in rotationally controlling their computers. Until then, we'll have to just stick with Microsoft Surface Dial or third-party solutions like this. Thank you for watching InnoIso. I hope you like this kind of retro review of the Microsoft Surface Dial. If you did, be sure to get subscribed because I've got more videos covering Surfaces coming up very soon here. Be sure to check out my Surface playlist where I review products like the Surface Pro 8 and the Microsoft Surface Laptop Studio. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.